S.S.S. Shemos, Tovshin Pei Aleph. This Shabbos is also Shabbos Mevorchim Chodesh Shvat. Unbelievably, what happened to Kislev and Teves, I don't even know, right? Hanukkah passed, the whole month of Teves passing by, and this week already is going to be Rosh Chodesh Shvat. And we begin a new Seder Shemos, totally different subject matter, different lessons, a lot to learn, and of course we're ready for every Thursday night. But before we begin the shir, I want to wish a mazel tov to our chief videographer over the past while, to David Aryeh Krausher, whose aufruf is this Shabbos. His wedding will be the next day. On Sunday night, we want to wish him a mazel tov, that he should be zoicha to build the Bayis Ne'eman B'Yisrael, and to keep coming back to the shir if his wife lets him, or he can bring her along. We have an S.S.S. here also, as we see every week. So we wish you lots of mazel and bracha. The Torah tells us in this week's parsha about the Shibud Mitzrayim, Vayehi bayomim harabim hoheim. Many days passed, and Klal Yisrael was hard at work in Mitzrayim. And what happened? Vayamos Melech Mitzrayim. The king of Mitzrayim died. Vayeyamchu b'nei Yisrael minu avoda. They sighed out because they had been working so hard. Vayizaku, they screamed out, Vatal Shavosam Elokim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu heard their screaming out. And the Torah continues, Vayeda Elokim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew what had to be done. Hashem heard their cries, and he remembered, the Torah tells us that Hashem remembered the bris, the covenant that he had made with the Avos, with Avraham Avinu, that they would work in Mitzrayim, and one day they would get out of Mitzrayim. And as we begin Seder Shemos, we need to understand that the parsha of Yitzias Mitzrayim and the subject matter of Yitzias Mitzrayim is allotted a very big portion in the Torah. And we actually speak about this regarding different inyanim in the Torah, that many times when the Torah has one extra letter, we have to understand why we darshan a myriad of things from one letter in the Torah, from one word, an extra word in the Torah. But here we see that the parsha of Mitzrayim is given such a large portion in the Torah. It's such a big subject. The Golus Mitzrayim, the beginning stirrings of Geula, like we have in our parsha, and then finally, coming up in the next couple of weeks, the Geula Shalema from Mitzrayim. And as we've said many times from the Nesivos Shalom, that the Torah does not tell us stories of the past. The Torah does not tell us about Yitzias Mitzrayim just for the sake of history, for us understanding what was a few thousand years ago. Each portion that we're going to learn about Mitzrayim and Yitzias Mitzrayim teaches us current lessons that apply to each and every one of our lives. And Golus, we know, Golus is, and it seems to be, an intractable portion of our history. So much of our history is in Golus, revolves around Golus, takes place in Golus, and it really, our current lives are affected so much by the fact that we are in Golus, and it encompasses actually most of our history. Most of our history has been spent in Golus, and it's part and parcel of every Jew, and it has to be. The suffering of Golus, the actual exile, the actual being out of Eretz Yisrael. And as a nation, and as individuals, we're so affected by Golus. And really, we need to know that until the Geula Shalema, when we finally see the Or Chadash Al Tzion Toyer, when the great light will shine on us, the great light will shine on Zion is going to remain that way. That we're going to have to worry about Golus and think about Golus. And the parsha that we are reading this week begins to teach us the vital lessons of and how to endure our Golus and the darkness of Golus that comes along with it. And the pasuk that I want to focus on this week, of one of the psukim that the Nesivos Shalom speaks about, is the pasuk that we mentioned at the beginning of this year, where the Melech Mitzrayim dies, and the Bnei Yisrael cry out to Hashem. The Nesivos Shalom tells us that this teaches us a yesod that we need to know of the beginning of Geula. Something that's going to start and has started every Geula that we've had up until this point, and a very important lesson and point that's going to be the beginning of our Geula. We know for 210 years in Mitzrayim, until this point, the Bnei Yisrael were in a dark Golus, and they did not even have the strength to cry out or to sigh to Hashem. They couldn't. You know, sometimes people, you're so deep in trouble, you're so troubled and you're so worried and you're working so hard that you don't even have a chance to cry out. And that's why the Torah specifically tells us that now they cried out, because up until this point, it was as if they had no hope. They could not daven or even hope that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would take them out of the Golus. They were so preoccupied by the thoughts of Golus, by the work that comes along with it, that they didn't even have a chance to sigh out. And when the Torah tells us, Vayei Anchu, the Melech Mitzrayim died, and now they sighed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it tells us that now that they finally sighed, this is the first sign of Geula. And you know why? Because it is the first sign of turning to Hashem, of knowing who to sigh out to, where your salvation is going to come from. It's not going to come from a paroi. It's not going to come from another person. It's not going to come from some wealthy person. It's not going to come from another direction. Vayeyanchu, they cried out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they realized that their salvation will only come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They didn't even have the strength to daven yet, but they began to sigh out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And without a voice, just sighing, just an inner, inaudible voice. And when the neshama of a Jew turns to Hashem, that's what it sounds like. When we sigh because the Golus is too much, and you know why the Golus is too much? No, not because physically we can't handle it. Much more than any physical pain which the Jews have endured and persevered through the past thousands of years and in every Golus, more so than that, what we cry out, what we sigh out, what we sigh about is our being far from Hashem spiritually. And that is really what becomes unbearable. It becomes unbearable because the distance between us and our Father, Hashem, has just become too great. Just like children who have been banished from the parents' premises, what bothers them is not necessarily the material things that they are now missing, but the distance, being distant from a parent. That is the way we should feel when we are now distant from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Bnei Yisrael sighed about the distance that was now between them and Hashem. And once they did that, the Torah tells us, Vayeda Elikim. Now HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew what we were saying. The sighing out was the beginning of Hashem seeing that, you know what? Look, it bothers them. Hashem saw that it bothers us, that we need to come back. We're unhappy with the current situation. The status quo is not acceptable to us anymore. And that opened the Sharei Geula for us. And the Torah is teaching us the lesson that pertains to every Golus, and a lesson for us to listen to and internalize, says the Nesivos Shalom. That of course the Golus that we are now in is a long and dark Golus. And there are many tzoros, and there are problems. But we need to feel that the biggest problem is that we are far from Hashem, and we are far from where we really need to be. And we have to take notice and at least sigh about it. It has to bother us. We have to know that when we're far from Hashem, we're not in our optimal place. We're not functioning as human beings, as Jews, as people, the way we should function. Once again, it has to bother us. It has to bother us that we are in Golus. And to sigh and to say, oh, this is not good. That is the aschalta de geula. It begins to open the doors for us because we show that it bothers us. We're not complacent. We're not happy. No matter how affluent we are in this Golus. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been so good to us financially in our generation and everything. But what's going on here? We're not in the house. We're not home. We have to sigh because it bothers us. And we can overcome physical pain. We can overcome so many different things. But being far from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's impossible for us to live with. And when we do that, Hashem takes notice of that. Vayeda Elikim. Hashem saw, Vayeyonchu, they're sighing out that it's no good. We miss you, Hashem. We want to be close to you. We want to live in Eretz Yisrael. We want to see the great light. We want to see that light of Mashiach already. Vayeda Elikim. And the Pasuk tells us, Vayeda Elikim, because only Hashem really knows what a sigh means. You know, it's brought down in the Sfarim that Malachim can understand certain things. They can understand different ways of speaking. They understand words. But when it comes to the inner sigh, the inner feelings, and the inner things that go on in a person's heart, and when they show that they're not happy, that is something that only HaKadosh Baruch Hu could see. Malachim cannot see that. So Vayeda Elikim, we sighed, and Hashem heard it. Hashem heard it and was now ready to bring the Geula, and that's why the Geula says in Nesivos Shalom, the Geula, we mentioned it on Pesach, Lo al yedei malach, v'lo al yedei shliach, ela HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvoidoi u'va'atzmoi. And it's for many reasons, but one of the reasons is because only Hashem heard those feelings. Hashem heard those sighs. So the Geula can only come through Hashem. And the lesson that we have to learn is one that's pretty obvious. The lesson is that if it worked in Mitzrayim, that's what's going to work for us. And no matter what we think, there's more Torah in our generation than probably ever in the history of the entire world. I mean, I didn't count and everything, but I venture to say, and I'd like to hear if somebody disagrees, but there's probably more people learning more Torah certainly than in the last couple of 1,000 years. There's more chesed going on in the world today than for sure in the last thousands of years. And guess what? We're still in Golus. We're still here. We're still far away. And we have to say, with all the Torah and with all the chesed, we're far from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem hasn't given us the schus, and this year we can really feel it. Most of us can't even get to Eretz Yisrael if you want to. We can't even get close. But even in Eretz Yisrael, that great light, that Or Chodesh Al Tzion Toyer, it's not there now. And we have to sigh about it. It has to bother us. And when Hashem sees that it bothers us, that's going to be the aschalta of our geula also. That's going to be the beginning of the end. Let's learn that lesson from this week's Parsha. Don't just read Parsha Shemos as a history. It's a lesson for us and something that if every one of us concentrates, maybe this year, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will listen to us and we will be zoicha to the final geula.